I still remember the night my wife's family looked at me like I was nothing. I was standing inside their beautiful mansion, surrounded by people wearing expensive clothes and drinking from glasses that probably cost more than my entire monthly salary. But the thing that hurt me the most was not their wealth. It was the way they made me feel like I did not belong. My name is Jamal Bennett, and for years I was treated like a mistake by the people who were supposed to become my family. They laughed at my old car, questioned my ability to provide, and made my wife feel embarrassed for choosing a man who was still building his life. But years later, the same people who pushed me away found themselves standing at my door, asking for the one thing they thought I would never have. They needed my help. And what happened next changed everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming amazing videos. Because this is the story of how the man they looked down on became the only person who could save them. I used to believe that if you treated people with kindness, respected their family, and showed up when they needed you, they would eventually see your heart. I thought character mattered more than money. I thought loyalty could build bridges that wealth could not destroy. But I learned something painful. Some people only respect what they can see, and for many years all they could see when they looked at me was what I did not have. My name is Jamal Bennett, and before anyone knew my name, before anyone respected my decisions, before anyone asked for my help, I was just the man they believed was not good enough for their family. I was the man with the old car, the man with the small apartment, the man who wore the same few outfits because I was trying to save every dollar I earned. To them, I was not a husband with dreams. I was a financial burden waiting to happen. And the people who made me feel that way were not strangers. They were my in-laws, the same people I hoped would one day call me family. The first time I met Reginald Whitmore, I knew immediately that he was a man who carried himself differently. He walked into every room like he owned it. And honestly, he probably did. Reginald was a successful businessman in Atlanta. He built his company from the ground up and became the kind of person people admired from a distance. He had the expensive suits, the luxury home, the private meetings, and the connections that opened doors most people never got close to. But there was something else about him. He believed success gave him the right to judge everyone else. And when he looked at me for the first time, I could tell he had already decided who I was. I met Reginald and Elaine Whitmore on a Sunday afternoon. Tasha had spent the entire drive telling me how much her parents meant to her. She told me her father was strict but had a good heart. She told me her mother cared deeply about family and reputation. And she told me the most important thing. Jamal, just be yourself. They will love you when they see the kind of man you are. I believed her. That was the kind of person I was. I believed people should be given the chance to know you before judging you. At that time, I had been working 2 jobs. During the day, I worked as a maintenance supervisor for a property company. At night, I delivered food and drove people around through different apps whenever I could. It was exhausting. Some nights I would come home after midnight, take off my shoes quietly, and sit on the edge of my bed just trying to find enough energy to start again the next morning. But I was proud of myself, because everything I had came from my own effort. I was not born into wealth. I did not have family money waiting for me. I did not have connections that could change my life overnight. I only had determination, and I thought that would be enough. When Tasha and I arrived at the Whitmore mansion, I remember looking at the house and feeling nervous. It was beautiful, the kind of house you see in magazines. The driveway was perfectly maintained. The entrance had huge doors and expensive decorations. Everything looked carefully designed to show success. Tasha squeezed my hand. "Relax," she whispered. I smiled. I walked inside, and that was the moment I realized I was entering a world where I would always be compared. At dinner, everything looked perfect. The table was full of expensive food. Everyone was dressed beautifully. The conversation sounded polite. But sometimes people can smile at you while making you feel small. Marcus Whitmore, Tasha's older brother, was the first person to make me uncomfortable. Marcus was 36 years old, successful, wealthy, and extremely confident. Too confident. He had the kind of personality where every conversation somehow returned to his achievements. If someone talked about traveling, Marcus had traveled farther. If someone talked about business, Marcus had built something bigger. If someone talked about success, Marcus made sure everyone remembered his. At first, I tried to understand him. I thought maybe he was just proud of his accomplishments. But then the questions started. "So Jamal," Marcus said while cutting his food, "what exactly are your plans for the future?" I smiled. "I want to continue growing in my career. Eventually, I want to start my own property management company." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's good." But the way he said it did not sound supportive. It sounded like someone encouraging a child. Then he asked another question. "Are you financially prepared for marriage?" The table became quiet. I looked at Tasha. She looked uncomfortable. I answered honestly. "I believe marriage is about building together. I may not have everything today, but I work hard, and I have a plan." Marcus leaned back. "A plan is good, but plans don't pay bills." Nobody laughed, but nobody corrected him either. That was the first moment I felt it. The feeling that maybe they were not trying to know me. Maybe they were trying to measure me. That dinner was the first time I understood that being accepted by a family was not always about love. Sometimes, it was about proving that you belonged. And according to the Whitmore family, I had a lot to prove. I remember sitting there at that table, surrounded by people who had everything I was still working toward. I could feel the difference between us. Not just the difference in money, but the difference in how they saw the world. To me, success was about effort. To them, success was about status. Marcus continued talking about his business achievements, describing his investments, his properties, and the people he knew. Every sentence was carefully placed, almost like he wanted everyone at the table to remember where he stood. Then his eyes turned toward me. "So Jamal, what kind of car do you drive?" It seemed like a simple question, but I knew it was not. I answered honestly, "A 2012 Toyota Camry." Marcus smiled slightly. "A reliable car." The way he said it made the compliment feel like an insult. Diana laughed softly. "Well, at least it gets you where you need to go." I looked at Tasha. Her face changed. She heard it too. That small comment. That little reminder that they believed they were above me. But I did not respond with anger. I had learned a long time ago that when people are trying to make you feel small, losing control only gives them more power. So I smiled and continued eating. But inside, I felt something break. Not because they had money, not because they lived differently, but because they had already decided my value before knowing my story. The drive home was quiet. Usually Tasha and I talked about everything. We talked about our dreams. We talked about our future. We talked about the family we wanted to build. But that night, neither of us said much. Finally, Tasha broke the silence. "Jamal, I'm sorry about tonight. I kept my eyes on the road." "Why are you apologizing?" "Because I know how they can be." I nodded. I knew she loved her family. And I never wanted to be the man who forced his wife to choose between him and the people she grew up with. But I also needed her to understand something. I don't expect your family to have the same life I have, Tasha. I don't expect them to understand everything about me. But I do expect respect. She looked down. I know. The truth was, I did not want their approval. I wanted a chance. I wanted them to see that I was not defined by my bank account. I wanted them to understand that a man could be building something even when there was no evidence yet. Because every successful person has a chapter where nobody believes in them. The difference is whether they allow those opinions to stop them, and I refused to stop. The next morning, my alarm rang at 4:30 a.m. While most people were still sleeping, I was already preparing for another day. That was my reality. I woke up before the sun. I worked when I was tired. I saved money when other people were spending. I sacrificed moments, because I believed those sacrifices would eventually create something better. There were times when I questioned myself. I wondered if I was moving too slowly. I wondered if people like the Whitmores were right. Maybe dreams were easier for people who started with money. Maybe hard work was not enough. But every time those thoughts entered my mind, I remembered why I started. I wanted a better life, not just for myself, for my future family, for my children, for the people I loved. I did not want to inherit success. I wanted to create it. And even though nobody around me could see it yet, I was planting seeds. One day, those seeds would grow. At work, I was known as the person who never gave up. My coworkers knew they could depend on me. If something broke, I fixed it. If someone needed help, I showed up. I believed the way you treat people mattered. Because I knew what it felt like to be ignored. I knew what it felt like when people looked at you and only saw your circumstances, so I treated everyone with respect. The tenants I worked with did not care about my salary. They cared that I answered their calls. They cared that I listened. They cared that I solved problems. And slowly, without even realizing it, I was building something more valuable than money. I was building a reputation for being dependable, a reputation for being honest, a reputation that would eventually open doors I never expected. But at that time, the Whitmore family did not know any of that. All they saw was a man who had not arrived yet, and they judged me because of where I was standing, not because of where I was going. Jamal Bennett walked through the apartment complex with a clipboard in his hand, wearing his work uniform and carrying the same quiet determination he had carried for years. To most people, he was just another property manager, but the tenants knew him differently. He was the man who answered calls when the heating stopped working in the middle of winter, the man who stayed late when a single mother needed help fixing a broken lock, the man who remembered the names of elderly residents and always asked if they were doing okay. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming so quickly," an elderly tenant said as Jamal checked the damaged pipe under her kitchen sink. "No problem, Miss Harris. That's what I'm here for," Jamal replied with a small smile. His coworker Marcus watched from the hallway. "You know, Jamal, I don't understand how you stay this patient," Marcus said. "Some people don't even appreciate what you do." Jamal tightened a loose connection and stood up. "I don't do it for appreciation. I do it because people deserve to be treated right." Marcus nodded, respecting the man standing in front of him. What nobody at work knew was that behind that calm smile was a man carrying a heavy disappointment. Every day, Jamal worked hard. Every day, he provided for his family. But at home, he felt like his efforts were invisible. That evening, as he drove back to his small apartment in Atlanta, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Tasha. "Don't forget, we're going to my parents' house this weekend. They want to talk about something important." Jamal stared at the message for a moment. Something important. Those words stayed in his mind. He had no idea that the conversation waiting for him would change the way he saw his marriage, his in-laws, and the people he trusted most. Jamal opened the apartment door quietly. The familiar sound of the old hinges filled the small living room. For a moment, he stood there without moving. This place was not perfect. The sofa was old. The kitchen cabinets needed repairs. The paint on the walls had started fading. But this was the home he and Tasha built together. At least, that was what he always believed. He removed his jacket and placed his keys on the table. "Tasha?" No answer. He walked toward the bedroom and saw his wife standing in front of the mirror. She was dressed beautifully. A designer-looking dress. A gold necklace around her neck. Her hair perfectly styled. Jamal smiled slightly. "You look amazing." Tasha looked at him through the mirror. "Thank you." There was a pause. Jamal noticed something different. Usually, Tasha would smile when he complimented her. Tonight, she didn't. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." Jamal knew that answer. It was the answer people gave when they didn't want to explain what was really happening. He walked closer. "You've been quiet since yesterday." Tasha continued adjusting her earrings. "My parents are expecting us tonight. I just want everything to go smoothly." Jamal nodded. Of course. He wanted to say more. He wanted to ask why he felt like every visit to her parents' house came with a new reminder that he wasn't enough. But he stayed quiet. Because he loved his wife. And because he had spent years convincing himself that patience could solve anything. The Whitmore mansion was everything Jamal's apartment was not. Huge, elegant, impressive. The driveway was filled with luxury vehicles. A massive chandelier could be seen through the front windows. The house looked like something from a magazine. Jamal parked his car carefully beside a row of expensive vehicles. He looked at his old sedan for a second. The paint was fading. The engine made strange noises sometimes. But it had carried him to work every day. It had carried Tasha to countless places. It was not perfect, but it was his. Tasha noticed him looking at the car. "You should really think about getting something better," she said softly. Jamal looked at her. "Maybe one day." She sighed. "Jamal, you've been saying that for years." The words were quiet, but they hurt. Before he could respond, the front door opened. "You're finally here," Tasha's mother, Diane Whitmore walked toward them. She hugged her daughter warmly. Then she looked at Jamal. A polite smile appeared on her face. Jamal, Mrs. Whitmore. They entered the mansion. Inside, everything showed wealth. The expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, the perfectly decorated rooms. Jamal looked around, but said nothing. He had learned over the years that saying too much in this house often created problems. Dinner started normally. Everyone talked about business, travel, investments, new opportunities. Jamal listened quietly. Then Tasha's father, Richard Whitmore, placed his glass down. "So, Jamal," he said. The room became slightly quieter. Jamal looked up. "Yes, sir?" Richard smiled. "How is work going?" "Good, very good actually. We recently completed management on 3 new properties." "That's good." But his tone didn't sound encouraging. It sounded like he was preparing to say something else. Richard leaned back. "You know, at your age, a man should be thinking bigger." Tasha immediately looked uncomfortable. "Dad," but Richard continued, "I'm just saying, life moves quickly. A person cannot remain in the same position forever." Jamal nodded politely. "I understand." Richard looked at him. "Do you?" The question hung in the air. Jamal remained calm. "I believe I do." Diane joined the conversation. "We only want the best for Tasha." Jamal looked at his wife, then back at them. "I want the best for her too." Richard smiled. Wanting something and being able to provide it are 2 different things. The table became silent. Tasha lowered her eyes. Jamal felt the familiar feeling. That feeling of being judged. Not by his character, not by his loyalty, not by his kindness, but by what was in his bank account. He took a slow breath. "I may not have everything today," Jamal said calmly, "but I work hard, and I take care of my responsibilities." Richard nodded. "Hard work is important, but ambition matters too." Jamal forced a small smile. "I agree." But inside, something was beginning to change. For years, he had ignored the comments, the comparisons, the subtle disrespect. But tonight felt different, because for the first time, he wondered if the people closest to his wife had ever truly respected him at all. I remember standing there near that window, looking out at the city lights of Atlanta, and thinking about how strange life could be. From the outside, everything about that house represented success. The beautiful walls, the expensive furniture, the perfect decorations, the kind of lifestyle many people dreamed about. But standing inside that mansion, I felt something I had never expected to feel. Small. Not because I was actually small. Not because I had failed. But because the people around me had spent the entire evening making me feel like my worth could be measured by what I owned. I looked down at my hands. Those were the same hands that worked long hours. The same hands that fixed broken apartments. The same hands that helped people who had nowhere else to turn. Those hands were not empty. But in that room, nobody saw what those hands had built. They only saw what those hands had not yet achieved. "Tasha," I said quietly. She looked at me. "Are you happy?" The question surprised her. "What do you mean?" I turned away from the window. "I mean, are you happy with me?" Her expression changed immediately. "Jamal, why would you ask me that?" "Because tonight didn't feel like they were questioning my job. It felt like they were questioning whether I was good enough for you." She walked closer. "My family can be difficult." I nodded. Difficult is when someone has a different opinion. What happened tonight felt different. She became quiet, because deep down she knew I was right. For years I had tried to ignore the little comments. The jokes, the comparisons, the questions about my income, the suggestions that Tasha deserved someone with more. I always told myself that maybe they just needed time. Maybe once they saw my heart, they would understand. But that night, something became clear. Some people don't judge you by who you are becoming. They judge you by who you are today. And sometimes, they never take the time to see beyond that. The drive home was one of the quietest drives Tasha and I had ever taken. Usually we would talk. We would laugh. We would discuss our plans. But that night, silence filled the car. I could hear the sound of the engine, the passing cars, the rain lightly hitting the windshield. Everything felt louder, because neither of us was saying what we were really thinking. Finally, Tasha spoke. "Jamal, my family doesn't hate you. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't say they hate me. Then what are you saying? I thought about my answer carefully. I'm saying they don't know me. She looked at me. What do you mean? I mean they know my salary. They know my car. They know where I live. But they don't know how hard I work. They don't know the nights I stay awake, trying to figure out how to build something better. They don't know how many times I wanted to quit but didn't. Tasha looked down. I continued. They see a man who hasn't made it yet. They don't see a man who is fighting every day to get there. That was the hardest part, because I wasn't asking them to hand me anything. I wasn't asking for their money. I wasn't asking for their connections. I wasn't asking them to believe I was already successful. I only wanted respect. That night, after Tasha went to sleep, I stayed awake. I sat at the small kitchen table in our apartment. The same table where we ate dinner. The same table where we paid bills. The same table where I had written down my goals for years. I opened my notebook. On the first page, I had written, "Build something that nobody can take away from you." I stared at those words for a long time, because that was always my dream. I didn't want to impress the Whitmores. I didn't want Marcus to suddenly respect me. I didn't want anyone to look at me and say I was successful. I wanted to become the kind of man I knew I could be, a provider, a leader, someone my family could depend on. I started studying. I researched real estate. I learned about property investments. I watched successful entrepreneurs explain how they started with nothing. And slowly, an idea began forming in my mind. I had spent years managing properties for someone else. I understood buildings. I understood tenants. I understood problems. Maybe it was time to build something of my own. The idea scared me, because starting a business required money. And money was the one thing I didn't have much of. But I had something else: experience, discipline, and determination. Things nobody could take away from me. Over the next few months, I changed. Not in the way people expected. I didn't become angry. I didn't become bitter. I didn't start trying to prove myself to everyone. Instead, I became more focused. Every morning, I woke up earlier. Every night, I studied longer. During the day, I continued doing my job. I continued helping people. I continued treating everyone with respect. Because I realized something important. The way people treated me did not have to determine the kind of person I became. The Whitmores had shown me what I did not want to become. I never wanted success to make me look down on others. I never wanted money to make me forget kindness. Because I knew what it felt like to be on the other side. I knew what it felt like to walk into a room and feel judged. And I promised myself that if I ever reached the top, I would remember the person I was while climbing. That night at the kitchen table was one of those moments nobody else saw. There were no cameras, no applause, no one telling me I was doing the right thing, no one reminding me that my effort mattered. It was just me, sitting alone in a quiet apartment, trying to convince myself that the pain I felt could become motivation instead of anger. I remember looking around that small kitchen and thinking about how many memories were connected to that place. That apartment was where Tasha and I started. It was where we celebrated our first anniversary. It was where we laughed about our dreams. It was where we talked about the future we wanted. When we first moved in, we did not see it as small. We saw it as the beginning. We saw it as proof that two people could start with very little and build something meaningful together. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Somewhere between family expectations, comparisons, and conversations about money, I started feeling like I was constantly defending my worth. And that feeling can affect a person. Because when the people outside your home doubt you, you can sometimes handle it. But when you feel that doubt entering your own marriage, it becomes harder. I loved Tasha. That never changed. But I started wondering if she was slowly becoming ashamed of the life we were building. That thought hurt more than anything her family said. Because Reginald Whitmore was not my husband. Elaine Whitmore was not my wife. Marcus Whitmore was not the person I came home to. But Tasha was. And I needed to know that the person standing beside me still believed in me, even when nobody else did. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I had barely slept. My mind kept replaying everything that happened at dinner. Every comment, every look, every uncomfortable silence. I got out of bed quietly, trying not to wake Tasha. But she opened her eyes. "You're already up?" I nodded. "Yeah." She looked at me for a few seconds. Then she asked something I did not expect. "Are you angry with me?" I stopped, because that question told me something. Tasha knew there was a problem. She knew I was hurt. I sat down beside her. "I'm not angry with you, but you're hurt." I looked away. "Yeah, I am." The room became quiet. Then she said something that stayed with me. "I don't want you to think I see you the way they see you." I looked back at her. "Do you?" Her eyes filled slightly. "Jamal." "No, Tasha. I'm asking because I need to know." I wasn't trying to fight. I wasn't trying to accuse her. I needed honesty. After a long pause, she answered, "No, I don't." I believed she meant it, but there was something else. Something I could feel. Tasha loved me, but she was also affected by the world she grew up in. She had spent her entire life around people who connected success with appearances. People who believed the right neighborhood, the right clothes, the right career, and the right connections determined someone's value. And even though she loved me, she had been surrounded by those beliefs for decades. Changing that was not going to happen overnight. "I just don't want my family to look at us like we failed," she whispered. Those words hurt, not because she said them to hurt me, but because they revealed something. She was worried about how we looked. I was worried about how we were, and there was a difference. After that conversation, I made a decision. I was done waiting for people to recognize my potential. I had spent too much time hoping someone would finally say, "Jamal, we see how hard you are working." I realized something. Sometimes you have to keep building even when nobody is watching. So I started taking my future more seriously. During lunch breaks, I studied. After work, I researched. On weekends, I visited neighborhoods around Atlanta and studied properties. I learned about rental markets. I learned about maintenance costs. I learned about what made some properties successful while others failed. The funny thing was, I had been surrounded by real estate for years. I repaired buildings. I managed problems. I worked with tenants. I understood what people needed, but I never believed I was ready. Fear had convinced me that I needed permission before I could start. Then I remembered something my grandfather once told me. He said, "A person who waits until they have everything will never begin anything." Those words stayed with me, because I realized I had been waiting for more money, waiting for more confidence, waiting for people to believe in me. But successful people don't always start because they feel ready. Sometimes they start because they are tired of standing still. While I was quietly working on myself, I did not know that conversations about me were happening behind closed doors. At the Whitmore house, Marcus had his own opinions, and Marcus was never someone who kept those opinions to himself. He believed he was protecting his sister, but the way he expressed it made me feel like I was a problem that needed to be solved. "I just don't understand what Tasha sees," Marcus told Diana one evening. Diana looked at him. "Jamal is a nice person." Marcus laughed. "Nice doesn't build a future." That sentence would later come back to me, because it represented everything they misunderstood about me. They thought kindness meant weakness. They thought humility meant lack of ambition. They thought because I was not showing success yet, I had none coming. But they did not know what was happening in my mind. They did not know the plans I was creating. They did not know the sacrifices I was making. They only saw the chapter I was in. They never imagined how the story would change. For a long time, I believed success happened when someone finally gave you an opportunity. I thought there was a moment where someone important would notice your hard work, recognize your potential, and open a door for you. But as I got older, I started understanding something different. Sometimes the door does not open. Sometimes you have to build your own. And that was exactly what I was trying to do. Every day, while I worked my regular job, I paid attention to everything around me. I watched how property owners made decisions. I watched what tenants complained about. I watched which buildings were successful and which ones were struggling. I realized that I had spent years learning an industry without even knowing I was preparing myself for something bigger. I was not just fixing problems. I was learning. Every broken pipe taught me something. Every conversation with a tenant taught me something. Every difficult situation taught me something. The same experiences that people overlooked were becoming the foundation for my future. But starting a business was not easy. The biggest challenge was not knowledge. It was money. I had responsibilities. Rent, bills, food, family expenses. I could not simply walk away from my job and chase a dream without a plan. So I decided to build slowly, quietly, patiently, the same way a person builds a house, one piece at a time. One evening, I finally decided to tell Tasha everything. I had kept my plans mostly to myself, because I did not want to create more pressure. I knew she was already dealing with questions from her family. I did not want her to feel like she had to defend me and my dreams at the same time. But she was my wife. She deserved to know. "Tasha, I want to show you something." She looked curious. I opened my laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen were pages of notes, business ideas, property research, financial plans. She looked at me. "Jamal, you've been working on this?" I nodded. "For months." Her expression changed, not in a negative way. She looked surprised. "I didn't know you were this serious." I smiled. "I've always been serious." She became quiet. Then she said something that hurt a little. "I guess I just didn't realize." Those words stayed with me. Because sometimes the people closest to you do not see your struggle. They only see the results when they finally appear. I wasn't upset with her, but I understood something. I had spent so much time trying to prove myself to people who doubted me that I forgot to show the person beside me what I was building. "I don't want to stay in the same place forever," I told her. "I know," she replied. "I want to create something for us. Something our children can be proud of one day." Tasha reached across the table and held my hand. "I believe in you, Jamal." For the first time in a while, I felt like I was not carrying everything alone. But while Tasha and I were trying to build something together, her family was building their own opinion of our marriage. Marcus Whitmore never hid what he thought. He believed people had a certain level of success they deserved, and according to him, I had not reached that level. One evening, Marcus sat in his home office with Diana. "Do you really think Jamal can provide the life Tasha grew up with?" Marcus asked. Diana looked thoughtful. "I don't know." Marcus shook his head. "That's the problem." "What problem?" "He is a good man. I'll give him that. But being a good man isn't the same as being successful." That was always how Marcus saw things. He separated character from achievement, as if a person could only deserve respect after they had something to show. Diana looked at him. "Maybe he will surprise everyone." Marcus smiled. "I hope he does." But his tone suggested he didn't believe it. And that was the thing about people who underestimate you. They often believe they understand your future because they have already judged your present. The months that followed tested me. There were nights when I wanted to give up, not because I stopped believing in myself, but because building something from nothing is exhausting. There were nights when I came home tired from work, ate a simple meal, and immediately opened my laptop. There were weekends when other people were relaxing, and I was studying. There were moments when I looked at my bank account and wondered if I was moving too slowly. But every time I felt discouraged, I remembered something. Nobody sees the foundation of a building. They only see the finished structure. Nobody sees the years of preparation behind success. They only see the moment when everything finally works. I knew my story was still being written, and I refused to let people who doubted me write the ending. One Saturday afternoon, something happened that I still remember clearly. I was walking through a neighborhood studying properties when I met an older man named Mr. Thomas. He owned several rental properties, but was struggling to manage them. We started talking. He asked what I did for work. I explained my experience. He listened carefully. Then he said something unexpected. "You know, young man, you understand this business better than you realize." I smiled. "I'm still learning." He nodded. "Everyone who becomes successful is still learning." That conversation stayed with me. Because sometimes encouragement comes from places you don't expect. The Whitmores looked at me and saw what I lacked. But a stranger looked at me and saw what I could become. And that small conversation became the beginning of an opportunity I never saw coming. I used to believe that love could survive anything. I believed that as long as two people chose each other every day, no one outside that relationship could break them apart. But I was slowly learning something painful. Sometimes the person you love can hear the voices of others louder than they hear your own. After that dinner with Tasha's family, something changed. At first, it was small, things most people would ignore. But when you have spent years with someone, you notice every little difference. The way they stop looking at you the same way. The way their replies become shorter. The way silence begins replacing conversations that once lasted for hours. That was happening between Tasha and me. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. I had picked up her favorite meal because I wanted to surprise her. For years, little things like that made her smile. But that night, when I walked into the house, she barely looked up from her phone. "Hey, babe," I said. "Hey," she replied quietly. I placed the food on the kitchen counter. "I got that pasta you like." She looked at it for a second. "Jamal, I'm not really hungry." I stopped. Not because she didn't want the food, but because I remembered a time when she would have hugged me before even opening the container. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine." Those two words, "I'm fine," they were becoming the answer to every question I asked. But she wasn't fine, and I knew it. A few days later, I noticed she had started spending more time at her parents' house. At first, I didn't complain. They were her family. I respected that. But something about it felt different. Before, she would come back and tell me about their conversations. Now, she came back quieter, more distant. One night, while we were sitting in bed, I finally asked, "Tasha, did I do something wrong?" She looked surprised. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I feel like something has changed." She looked away. "Nothing has changed. Tasha, I know you. I know when something is bothering you." She sighed. "Sometimes I just think about the future." I frowned. "The future?" "Yes." "What about it?" She hesitated, and that hesitation hurt more than any answer she could have given. "I just wonder if we are really going in the same direction." I stared at her. After everything we had built together, those words felt heavy. "What does that mean?" She looked down. "I don't know, Jamal, but I knew. Someone had put that thought in her mind. And deep inside, I already knew who." The next week, I worked on a major business proposal. It was the biggest opportunity I had ever received. If it worked, it would change everything. I wanted Tasha to be the first person I told. I came home excited. "Tasha, guess what?" She looked up from her laptop. "What?" "I got the meeting. The company wants to discuss my proposal." "That's good." Her response was calm, too calm. I waited for the excitement, the smile, the celebration, anything. But it never came. "That's it?" I asked. She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is something we talked about for months. I'm happy for you." But she didn't sound happy. She sounded like she was congratulating a stranger. That moment broke something inside me. Because success feels empty when the person you love no longer celebrates with you. Later that night, I walked past the living room and heard Tasha on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen, but one sentence stopped me. "I know, Dad. I'm thinking about everything." My heart sank. "Dad, Marcus Whitmore." I stood there quietly. Then I heard her say, "I just don't want to make the wrong decision." I walked away before hearing anything else. But those words followed me to bed. The wrong decision. Was our marriage now a decision she regretted? Was I becoming someone she needed permission to love? That night, I lay beside my wife, but I felt miles away from her. And for the first time since we got married, I wondered if I was the only person still fighting for us. I used to believe that the hardest battles in marriage came from outside. I thought it would be the bills, the long hours at work, unexpected problems, or the challenges that every couple faces when they are trying to build a life together. I never imagined that one of my greatest struggles would be sitting beside the woman I loved and feeling like I was slowly losing her. That night, after Tasha returned from her parents' mansion, I noticed something different about her. She walked through the front door quietly, not the way she used to. Years ago, whenever she came home, she would look for me first. She would smile. She would tell me about her day. Sometimes she would complain about small things that happened at work, and I would listen because I loved hearing her voice. But that night, she walked past me. No hug, no smile, no "how was your day?" Just silence. I watched her place her purse on the table and remove her coat. "Tasha," I called softly. She stopped. "Yeah?" I looked at her face. There was something heavy behind her eyes. Something she wasn't telling me. "How was your visit with your parents?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she forced a small smile. "It was fine. I knew my wife." And that was not a fine expression. "That doesn't sound like fine." She sighed. Jamal, please. I'm tired. Those words hurt more than she probably realized. Because I wasn't asking to argue. I wasn't asking to pressure her, I was asking because I cared. I walked closer. Did they say something about me? Her eyes moved away from mine. That was my answer. I felt my chest tighten. Tasha, she interrupted. My family just worries about me. Worries about you because of me? She stayed quiet. That silence was louder than any insult. I looked down for a moment, trying to control my emotions. After all these years, do they still think I'm not good enough for you? Tasha finally looked at me. Jamal, it's not that simple. Those words stayed with me. Because sometimes people don't realize how painful it is when the person you love refuses to defend you. I wasn't asking Tasha to fight her family. I wasn't asking her to choose between us. I just wanted to know that when people looked down on me, she still saw the man she married. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I made breakfast, not because everything was okay, but because I still believed marriage meant trying even when things became difficult. I prepared her favorite coffee. I made eggs the way she liked them. I placed everything on the kitchen counter. When she came downstairs, she stopped. For a second, I saw the old Tasha, the woman who used to appreciate every little thing. But then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her mother's name appeared. The warmth disappeared from her face. Hello, Mom. I watched her listen. Her expression changed. Yes. I'll come by later. She ended the call. I looked at her. Everything okay? She picked up her coffee. My parents want to talk. I nodded slowly. About what? She hesitated. Then she said something that I never forgot. About my future. My heart sank. Because I was standing right there. Her husband. Her partner. The man she promised forever to. But somehow, her future sounded like something that didn't include me. The Whitmore mansion had always felt like a place where everything had a price. The marble floors. The expensive paintings. The perfectly arranged furniture. Everything inside that house spoke of success. But standing there that night, Tasha felt something she could not explain. She felt small. She walked through the massive entrance hall slowly, holding her phone tightly in her hand. Her mother, Elaine Whitmore, sat in the living room wearing an elegant black dress, sipping tea, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. Her father, Reginald Whitmore, sat across from her, reading something on his tablet. Neither of them looked surprised to see her. Tasha, her mother said calmly, come sit down. Tasha forced a small smile. Mom? Elaine studied her daughter's face. You don't look happy. Tasha looked away. I'm fine. Reginald lowered his tablet.
People who are fine don't come to their parents' house late at night looking like they have lost something. The words hit her. Because deep down, she knew she had lost something. Not money, not comfort, something more important. She had lost the closeness she once had with Jamal.
I sat alone in the living room. The food I had brought home earlier was still on the table. The same meal Tasha used to love. The same meal that used to make her smile. But that night, it became a reminder. A reminder that love cannot survive when only one person is fighting. I looked at my wedding ring. 7 years. 7 years of choosing her. 7 years of putting her first. I remembered when we had nothing. When we lived in a small apartment. When Tasha used to tell me, Jamal, one day we will look back at this and be proud. I believed her. I believed in us. But somewhere along the way, her family's voice became louder than mine. Marcus Whitmore stood near the window looking over the estate. Diana sat comfortably on the sofa. They had been discussing Tasha's marriage. Marcus shook his head. I still don't understand why she is holding on. Diana smiled. Because she thinks love is enough. Marcus laughed quietly. Love doesn't maintain a lifestyle. He walked toward the desk. Tasha was raised differently. She grew up around success. Around people who built something. Diana crossed her arms. And now she's married to someone who thinks working hard is the same as being successful. The words were cruel, but nobody corrected them. Because in that room, money had always been the measure of a person. Reginald entered. What are you two discussing? Marcus looked at his father, Jamal. A long silence filled the room. Reginald sighed. I never hated the man. Diana looked surprised. I thought you didn't respect him. Reginald looked away. Those are different things, but even he knew the truth. He had judged Jamal before truly knowing him. The bedroom was quiet. Too quiet. Tasha finally returned home. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting, not because I wanted an argument, because I wanted my wife back. She placed her bag down. Jamal, I looked at her. Can I ask you something? She nodded. When did I stop being enough? Her expression changed. Jamal, don't say that. Then tell me the truth. Silence. The silence hurt more than any answer. I feel like I'm losing you, I said. Tasha looked down. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I stood up slowly. No, Tasha, I understand pressure. I understand waking up every morning knowing I have to provide. I understand people looking down on me. But what I don't understand is coming home to my own wife and feeling like I'm a stranger. Her eyes became emotional, but she didn't respond, and that was the answer. A week later, the Whitmore family hosted another dinner, but this time, Jamal was invited. Tasha wanted him there. She hoped things would change. The dining table was filled with expensive food. Everyone looked perfect. But the atmosphere was uncomfortable. Marcus looked at Jamal. So, how is the property management business? Jamal smiled. It's going well. Marcus nodded. Still doing small projects? Tasha noticed the insult. Marcus. But he continued. I just mean, some people are meant for bigger things. Jamal placed his glass down. I agree. Everyone looked at him. Jamal continued. But bigger things don't always come from bigger titles. Sometimes they come from character. The room became silent. For the first time, nobody had a response. Reginald looked at him differently. Not with pity, with curiosity. Because for the first time, he was seeing Jamal beyond his income. He was seeing the man. Later that night, Jamal and Tasha drove home silently. The city lights passed through the window. Tasha finally spoke. I'm sorry. I looked at her. For what? For allowing my family to make you feel like you weren't enough. I didn't answer immediately, because apologies are easy. Changing is harder. I reached for her hand. But this time, she had to understand something. Love could survive many things, but it could not survive being constantly tested. 6 months passed after that dinner at the Whitmore mansion. 6 months since I sat across from people who had already decided who I was before they ever took the time to know me. 6 months since I realized something painful about life. Sometimes the people closest to you can make you question your own worth. But I learned another lesson too. You cannot spend your entire life trying to prove yourself to people who have already chosen not to see you. You have to build anyway. You have to keep moving. Even when nobody claps. Even when nobody believes. The alarm rang at 5 a.m. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. For a few seconds, I stayed there quietly, thinking. Thinking about how much my life had changed, not because I had become someone else, but because I had finally stopped waiting for people to approve of me. I turned and looked beside me. Tasha was still sleeping. For years, waking up beside her was the happiest part of my day. But recently, there was a distance between us that neither of us knew how to close. I quietly got out of bed. I prepared coffee. I checked emails. And then I opened the folder that would eventually change everything. A business proposal, something I had been working on for months. A property development idea that most people would have laughed at. A plan to transform abandoned properties in Atlanta into affordable luxury housing. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to prove Marcus Whitmore wrong. I just wanted to build something meaningful, something with my name on it. My office wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a skyscraper with expensive furniture. It was a small space above a local business. But it was mine. Every scratch on the desk, every late night, every difficult client, every rejection letter, they were all part of my journey. My assistant, Kevin, walked into my office. Jamal, you got another rejection. I smiled slightly. Another one? He handed me the letter. I opened it. Another investment company had rejected my proposal. Kevin shook his head. I don't understand them. What do you mean? You have a solid plan. You know these properties. You know the neighborhoods. I looked at the letter. They don't see the vision yet. Kevin smiled. And what happens when they finally see it? I looked out the window. Then I'll already be ahead. Across the city, Marcus Whitmore sat inside his father's company. Everything around him represented success. The office, the view, the reputation. But Marcus was facing a problem. A major investment project was failing. A development deal that had cost the company millions was becoming a disaster. His team had underestimated the neighborhood. They had ignored the people living there. And now investors were losing confidence. Reginald Whitmore looked at the reports. This cannot continue. Marcus tightened his jaw. I'll fix it. His father looked at him. You said that last month. The room became quiet. For the first time in years, Marcus felt pressure. Real pressure. Not the pressure of maintaining an image. The pressure of actually solving a problem. That evening, Tasha noticed something different about me. She watched me sitting at the dining table, working on my plans. You've been spending a lot of time on this. I looked up. Because it matters. She sat across from me. What happens if it doesn't work? I closed my laptop. Then I learn. She looked surprised. That's it? That's it. I smiled. Tasha, failure doesn't scare me anymore. Do you know what scares me? She waited. Spending my whole life trying to convince people I'm valuable. Her expression changed, because she knew exactly what I meant. Meanwhile, Tasha's family continued living the life they built. But behind the luxury, things were beginning to change. Elaine noticed it first. The company wasn't as stable as before. The reputation they protected so carefully was starting to show cracks. She looked at Reginald. Do you think Marcus is ready to handle everything? Reginald didn't answer immediately, because deep down he wasn't sure. And somewhere in Atlanta, the man they had underestimated was quietly building something they never expected. A future, a legacy, and eventually, a name they would all remember. There are moments in life when everything seems quiet, when nothing appears to be changing, when you are working, struggling, and wondering if all your effort is even making a difference. But sometimes, while you are waiting for your breakthrough, someone is watching, someone is paying attention, someone sees what others ignored. And for me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. Rain tapped against the office window. I sat at my desk reviewing documents for the 100th time. The numbers were not perfect. The proposal was not backed by a famous company, and my name did not carry the weight of someone like Whitmore. But I believed in what I created. My phone suddenly rang. I looked at the unknown number. Normally, I ignored calls like that, but something told me to answer. Hello, this is Jamal Bennett. A calm voice responded. Mr. Bennett, my name is Daniel Brooks. I'm with Brooks Urban Development. I sat up straight. I knew that name. They were one of the biggest property development companies in Atlanta. How can I help you? There was a short pause. We reviewed your housing redevelopment proposal. I looked at the papers on my desk. The same proposal many companies rejected. Okay? We would like to schedule a meeting. For a moment, I couldn't speak. A meeting, not a rejection, not another polite email saying they weren't interested. A meeting. When? Tomorrow morning. I wrote down the details. After the call ended, I sat back in my chair. I didn't celebrate. I didn't jump. I just stared at the phone. Because after so many doors closed, one had finally opened. When I arrived home, Tasha was preparing dinner. She noticed something different about me. You look happy. I placed my keys on the counter. I got a meeting tomorrow. She smiled. With who? Brooks Urban Development. Her expression changed immediately. Jamal, that's huge. I nodded. It could be. She walked closer. I knew you could do it. Those words, they were simple, but they meant something. Because for a long time, I felt like the person closest to me had forgotten what I was capable of. I smiled. Thank you. That night, for the first time in months, we sat together without tension. We talked, we laughed, and for a few hours, it felt like we were finding our way back. The building was impressive. Glass walls, modern design, executives walking around with confidence. I adjusted my suit before entering, not because I wanted to pretend to be someone else, because I wanted to respect the opportunity. Inside the conference room, several executives waited. Daniel Brooks stood and shook my hand. Jamal Bennett. Daniel Brooks. He smiled. I have to admit something. I looked at him. When your proposal first reached my desk, I almost ignored it. I nodded. Why didn't you? He looked through the documents. Because my assistant told me something. What was that? She said, this man understands the people he's building for. The room became quiet. Daniel continued. Most developers see numbers. But you saw families. That sentence stayed with me, because that was always my goal. I didn't want to build buildings. I wanted to build opportunities. Meanwhile, Marcus Whitmore walked into his father's office. His expression was serious. "Father, we have a problem." Reginald looked up. "What kind of problem?" "Our latest development project is failing." Reginald frowned. "How bad?" Marcus placed the reports on the desk. "Bad enough that investors are questioning our decisions." Reginald opened the file. The disappointment on his face was clear. For years, Marcus had been treated as the future of the company, the perfect son, the successful son. But success was not only about appearances, and now reality was demanding proof. The meeting ended differently than I expected. Daniel stood and extended his hand. "We want to partner with you." I shook his hand. "Thank you." But then he added something. "There is one condition." I looked at him. "We need you to present this project at the Atlanta Development Summit next month." I froze slightly. The Atlanta Development Summit, the same event attended by the biggest names in real estate, the same event where people like Reginald Whitmore and Marcus Whitmore would be present. I didn't know it yet, but that room would change everything. Because the man they once dismissed as not enough was about to stand in front of them, not asking for acceptance, not seeking approval, but showing them exactly who he had become. I still remember standing outside that building, the Atlanta Development Summit, a place where some of the most powerful people in the city gathered. Executives, investors, developers, people whose names carried weight before they even entered the room. And there I was, Jamal Bennett, the same man who once sat quietly at a dinner table while people questioned whether I was good enough for their daughter. The same man who drove an old car while people judged my future based on my present. The same man who went home after being humiliated and wondered if anyone truly believed in him. But that night was different. I wasn't walking into that building hoping someone would finally approve of me. I wasn't walking in trying to prove that I deserved a seat at the table. I was walking in because I had earned one. And that feeling was something nobody could take away from me. When I walked inside, I immediately felt the difference. This was the kind of room where people could tell who belonged. Not because of anything written on a person's face, but because of confidence, because of experience, because of reputation. I saw familiar names on banners around the room, companies I had studied, people whose interviews I had watched late at night while sitting at my kitchen table. Years earlier, I was learning from these people through a computer screen. Now I was standing in the same room. That moment reminded me of something. Your beginning does not determine your ending. The place where you start does not decide where you finish. The only person who can decide that is you. What I didn't know was that the Whitmore family would also be there. Reginald Whitmore had always been a powerful businessman. His name opened doors. His reputation commanded respect. Marcus walked beside him with the confidence of someone who had spent his entire life believing success belonged to him. And honestly, I understood why. Marcus had grown up surrounded by opportunity. He had connections, resources, a family name that carried influence. But what Marcus never understood was that having advantages does not automatically make someone better, and lacking advantages does not make someone less valuable. That was the lesson I had spent years learning. Before I went on stage, I looked through my presentation one last time. My hands were slightly shaking, not because I didn't believe in my idea, because I understood the importance of the moment. This was bigger than a business deal. This was years of sacrifice standing in front of me. Every early morning, every rejection, every night I questioned myself. Every time someone made me feel like I wasn't enough. All of it brought me to that moment. A staff member walked toward me. "Mr. Bennett, you're next." I closed the folder. I took a deep breath, and I walked toward the stage. The moment I stepped onto that stage, I saw them, the Whitmores, sitting among the audience. For a second, everything went quiet. Marcus looked shocked. Diana's expression changed. Elaine stared at me. And Reginald simply watched. The same man who once questioned my ability to build a future was now watching me explain the future I had created. But I didn't let that distract me, because this presentation was not about revenge. It was not about making anyone feel embarrassed. It was about showing what happens when someone refuses to give up. I began speaking. I talked about communities, families, affordable housing, creating opportunities for people who were often overlooked. And as I continued, I noticed something. People were listening, not because of my last name, not because of who I knew, but because of what I had built. When the presentation ended, the room filled with applause. Daniel Brooks shook my hand. "You did it!" I smiled. "We did it." Because I knew something important. Nobody succeeds completely alone. There are always people who encourage you, people who give you opportunities, people who believe in you before the world notices. As I looked across the room, I saw the Whitmore family standing there. Years ago, I wanted them to see my value, but standing there that night, I realized something. I didn't need them to see it anymore, because I finally saw it myself. After my presentation ended, something happened that I never expected. People who had walked past me before were suddenly walking toward me. People who never asked about my dreams were suddenly interested in my vision. People who once saw me as a man who had not achieved enough were now asking questions about how I built my plan. And I understood something in that moment. The world often pays attention to results. People rarely see the struggle that creates them. They did not see the nights I stayed awake studying. They did not see the moments I questioned myself. They did not see the sacrifices behind every decision. They only saw the finished product. But I remembered every step, every rejection, every difficult conversation, every time I had to choose discipline over comfort, because those moments created the person standing in that room. I saw Reginald Whitmore walking toward me. For a second, I thought about all the times we had sat across from each other. The first dinner at the mansion, the questions about my job, the way he looked at me like I was someone who needed to prove himself. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't looking at me like a problem. He was looking at me like an equal. "Jamal." I nodded. "Mr. Whitmore." There was a pause. Then he extended his hand. "I have to admit something." I shook his hand. "What is that?" He looked around the room. "I underestimated you." Those words surprised me. Not because I needed to hear them, but because I never expected him to say them. I nodded politely. "Thank you." Reginald looked at me carefully. "Your project, it is impressive. I appreciate that." He looked slightly uncomfortable. Maybe because admitting he was wrong was something he wasn't used to doing. "How long have you been working on this?" "Almost a year." He looked surprised. "A year?" I nodded. Most of that time was spent trying to convince people to believe in it. Reginald looked down briefly. I wondered if he remembered all the times he had been one of those people who didn't believe. Marcus was different. He didn't come over. He didn't congratulate me, he just watched. And honestly, I understood why. For years, Marcus had built his identity around being the successful one, the businessman, the person everyone admired, the person who always had the answer. Seeing me succeed challenged something inside him, because my success wasn't supposed to happen, at least not in his mind. I was supposed to remain the hard-working man with the small apartment, the man who needed years before he could stand beside people like them. But life has a way of surprising people, and sometimes the person everyone overlooks becomes the person everyone remembers. When I finally saw Tasha, something inside me softened, because despite everything that happened, she was still the woman I loved. She smiled. "I am so proud of you." I looked at her. Those words meant more coming from her than anyone else. But I also knew we couldn't pretend nothing happened. "Thank you." She stepped closer. "I should have believed in you more." I stayed quiet. Because honesty mattered, not just apologies. "Tasha, I never needed you to choose me over your family." She looked at me. "I only needed you to stand beside me." Her eyes became emotional. "I know." And in that moment, I saw regret on her face. Real regret. Not because I was successful, but because she realized she had almost lost sight of the man she married. That night changed something. Not everything. A successful presentation cannot erase months of pain. Money cannot repair every wound. And recognition cannot automatically rebuild trust. But it started a conversation. A real one. For the first time in a long time, Tasha and I talked without defending ourselves, without outside opinions, without her family's voices influencing every word. Just us, the way it used to be. But I didn't know then that this was only the beginning. Because while some people were beginning to see my value, others were about to face a problem they never expected. And that problem would bring them to my door. There is something people rarely talk about when you finally begin succeeding. They talk about the money. They talk about the recognition. They talk about the moment everyone starts saying your name. But they don't talk about the responsibility, because success does not remove pressure. It creates a different kind of pressure. Suddenly, more people depend on your decisions. More people depend on your judgment. More people expect you to have answers. And I was learning that lesson every day. My company was growing. The housing project with Brooks Urban Development had become one of the most talked about projects in Atlanta. People who once ignored my calls were now returning them. People who once questioned my ability were now asking for meetings. But I never forgot where I came from. I still remembered sitting at that Whitmore dinner table feeling like I didn't belong. I remembered Marcus's comments. I remembered the way people looked at me. And I promised myself something. I would never become the kind of person who made others feel small, just because I had more than them. While my life was changing, the Whitmore family's situation was becoming more difficult. From the outside, everything still looked perfect. That was the thing about powerful families. They know how to protect an image. They know how to smile in public. They know how to make people believe everything is under control. But behind closed doors, things were different. Reginald Whitmore sat in his office looking at numbers that worried him. A major development project had gone wrong. The investors were unhappy. The costs were increasing. The timeline was falling apart. Marcus stood across from him. I don't understand how this happened. Reginald looked at the reports. Because we moved too quickly. Marcus shook his head. We had the best team. Reginald looked up. No, we had people who thought they knew everything. That sentence bothered Marcus. Because deep down, he knew his father was right. They had focused on reputation. They had focused on appearances. They had underestimated the importance of understanding the people they were building for. Something Jamal had always understood. For years, Marcus believed success was about having the right connections, the right name, the right appearance, and those things mattered. But they were not everything. Because when problems arrived, people didn't care about your reputation. They cared about whether you could solve them. Reginald looked at Marcus. We need someone who understands this type of project. Marcus frowned. Who? Reginald looked down at the file in his hand. A name was written on the document. A name Marcus did not expect. Jamal Bennett. Marcus stared. No. Reginald looked at him. No? Marcus shook his head. We can't bring him into this. Reginald remained calm. Why? Marcus hesitated. Because the real answer wasn't business. The real answer was pride. Tasha noticed something was wrong before anyone told her. She knew her family. She knew their confidence. She knew their pride. And she knew when something was troubling them. Her mother finally admitted it. The company is facing challenges. Tasha looked shocked. What kind of challenges? Elaine looked away. Serious ones. For a moment, Tasha remembered something. She remembered how her family had judged Jamal. How they believed his career was too small. How they believed he wasn't capable of standing beside them. But now, they were facing a problem connected to the same industry Jamal understood better than anyone. The irony was impossible to ignore. 2 days later, my phone rang. I answered. Jamal Bennett. The voice on the other end was familiar. A voice I never expected to hear. Jamal, this is Reginald Whitmore. I sat back in my chair. For a moment, I said nothing. Because life has a strange way of bringing people back to the same place. The man who once questioned whether I was good enough was now calling me. I remained respectful. Mr. Whitmore, how can I help you? There was a pause. Then he said, I would like to discuss a business matter with you. I looked out my office window. The city stretched before me. A city where I had struggled. A city where I had been underestimated. A city where I had built something. And I knew immediately, this conversation was not just about business. It was about everything that happened before. There was a time when walking into the Whitmore building would have made me feel nervous. Years earlier, I would have looked at that building and thought about everything I didn't have. The money, the connections, the family name, the influence. I would have wondered if I belonged there. But that day was different. I wasn't entering as Tasha's husband. I wasn't entering as the man her family believed needed to prove himself. I was entering as Jamal Bennett, a businessman, a partner, a person who had built something with his own hands. And as I stepped through those doors, I realized something important. The same place that once made me feel small no longer had that power over me. Because confidence does not come from being accepted by others. It comes from knowing who you are. When I entered the conference room, everyone was already there. Reginald, Elaine, Marcus, Diana, the same people who once sat across from me at a dinner table and judged my life based on what they saw. But this time, something was different. The atmosphere, the way they looked at me. Before, their eyes searched for weaknesses. Now, they were looking for answers. Reginald stood up. Jamal. I nodded. Mr. Whitmore. He extended his hand. I shook it. It was a simple gesture, but it carried years of history, years of misunderstanding, years of pride. Everyone sat down. Reginald opened the meeting. We need your expertise. Those words were something I never expected to hear. Not from him. Not after everything. Reginald explained the situation. Their development project was struggling. The location was wrong. The planning was rushed. The community had rejected the project, and investors were losing confidence. I listened carefully, not because I wanted them to fail, but because I knew what it felt like when people ignored the reality in front of them. Finally, Reginald asked, "What would you do?" Everyone looked at me, including Marcus. I opened the documents. I would start by listening. Marcus raised his eyebrows. Listening? I nodded. Yes. The biggest mistake companies make is believing money solves everything. The people living in these communities matter. Their concerns matter. Their trust matters. The room became quiet, because those were the same principles I had built my own company around. Marcus leaned back. You make it sound simple. I looked at him. It isn't simple, but it is necessary. After the meeting, Marcus stopped me in the hallway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I didn't expect you to actually understand this. I looked at him. What did you think I understood? He hesitated. Property management. I waited. Not development. I nodded slowly. There it was. The same assumption. The same judgment. Just in a different form. Marcus, the difference between us was never that I didn't understand success. The difference was that I had to learn it from the ground up. He looked away, because deep down he knew I was right. I didn't inherit opportunities. I created them. That night, I told Tasha everything. She listened quietly. They asked you for help? I nodded. She smiled slightly. I can't believe it. I looked at her. Neither can I. For a moment, we both laughed, but then the laughter faded, because we both knew there was something deeper. They finally see you, she said. I looked down. I never needed them to see me. She became quiet. I needed you to see me. Her eyes filled with emotion, because she knew what I meant. The hardest part of being underestimated isn't when strangers do it. It's when the person you love starts believing the same things. Walking away from that building, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because the Whitmores needed me, not because they finally respected me, but because I no longer needed their approval. The man who walked into that building years ago, searching for acceptance, was gone. In his place was someone who understood his own value. And I knew this was only the beginning, because helping the Whitmore family solve their business problem would change everything. But what happened next would test whether they had truly changed. There was something I learned about success that nobody warned me about. Sometimes the hardest decisions are not about money. They are about your heart. When Reginald Whitmore asked for my help, I knew it was a business opportunity. I knew it could bring my company to another level. A partnership with Whitmore Enterprises could open doors I never imagined. But when I looked at those documents sitting on my desk, I didn't just see numbers. I saw memories. I remembered sitting at their dinner table while Marcus questioned my ambitions. I remembered the uncomfortable silence when people discussed my future as if I wasn't in the room. I remembered going home with Tasha and pretending those moments didn't hurt. Because sometimes, when you love someone, you swallow pain just to keep peace. But pain that is ignored does not disappear. It waits. And now, years later, the same family that once made me feel like I didn't belong was asking me to help them survive. Tasha, I need to ask you something. She looked at me. What? Do you think your family has really changed? The question stayed between us. She didn't answer immediately, because she knew exactly what I meant. Finally, she said, "I think they are trying." I nodded. Trying is different from changing. She looked down. I wasn't trying to punish her family. I wasn't trying to remind them of every mistake. But I needed to know something. If I helped them, would they respect me? Or would they only respect what I could do for them? Tasha reached for my hand. "Jamal, I know what they did hurt you." I looked at her. It wasn't just what they did. Then what was it? It was feeling like I had to earn my place in your life. Her eyes became emotional, because she knew that was the truth. While I was making my decision, the Whitmore family was having their own conversations. Reginald sat in his office looking at the project reports. For the first time in a long time, he admitted something difficult. We were wrong about him. Elaine looked at him. "About Jamal?" He nodded. She was quiet, because admitting that meant accepting something uncomfortable. They had judged a man they never truly understood. They saw his financial situation, but they never saw his discipline. They saw his old car, but they never saw the hours he spent building his future. They saw what he lacked, but they ignored what he carried. Reginald sighed. "I thought success was about what a person owned." Elaine looked at him. "And now?" He looked at Jamal's proposal on his desk. "Now I think it's about what a person creates." Marcus had the hardest time accepting everything. Because for Marcus, this was not just about business. It was personal. His entire life, he had been the person people admired. The successful son, the wealthy businessman, the one who had everything figured out. Then Jamal came along, a man who started with less, a man without the same advantages. And somehow, he was becoming someone Marcus had to respect. One evening, Marcus searched for information about Jamal's projects. He read about the communities he helped, the properties he transformed, the people who benefited from his work. And for the first time, Marcus saw something clearly. Jamal wasn't successful because he had beaten people like him. He was successful because he had built something valuable. A few days later, Reginald asked to meet me privately. Not at his office, not in a conference room, just two men sitting across from each other. When he arrived, he looked different. Less like a businessman protecting his image, more like a father who had something to say. "Jamal." "Mr. Whitmore." He took a breath. "I owe you an apology." I listened. "I judged you." Those words were not easy for him. I looked at where you were starting instead of where you were going. I remained quiet. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is allow someone to finish their apology. I was wrong. I looked at him. "Thank you for saying that." He nodded. "I want you to know something. This partnership is not charity. I know. It is because I believe you are the right person for this." For the first time, I believed he meant it. I signed the agreement. Not because I wanted to prove a point, not because I wanted the Whitmores to feel guilty. I signed because I believed the project could help people. That had always been my purpose. But as I looked around that room, I knew something. This partnership was going to change more than a business. It was going to change relationships. Because when people are forced to work together, they eventually have to see each other differently. And Marcus Whitmore was about to learn that the man he underestimated was the man he needed beside him. There is a difference between someone apologizing and someone actually changing. I learned that lesson many times in my life. Words are easy. Anyone can say they are sorry. Anyone can admit they were wrong when circumstances force them to. But true change happens when a person begins seeing the world differently. And that was the journey Marcus Whitmore was about to face. At first, working with Marcus was difficult. Not because he was incapable. Marcus was intelligent. He understood business. He knew how to negotiate. He knew how to speak confidently in a room full of executives. But there was one thing he struggled with: listening. For years, Marcus had been surrounded by people who agreed with him. People who respected his last name. People who rarely challenged his decisions. But I didn't work that way. I wasn't there because of the Whitmore name. I was there because I knew the work. And if something was wrong, I would say it. During our first project meeting together, Marcus disagreed with one of my suggestions. "We don't need to change the design," he said. I looked at the plans. "The design looks good on paper." He nodded. "Exactly. But the people who will live here are not pieces of paper." The room became quiet. Marcus looked at me. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to understand what families actually need." I explained that the original plan focused too much on appearance. It looked impressive, but it didn't consider practical things: parking, community spaces, family needs, safety. Marcus listened. At first, I could tell he wanted to argue. But then something unexpected happened. He asked, "So what would you change?" That question might seem small to some people. But for Marcus, it was a major step. Because for the first time, he wasn't trying to prove he was right. He was trying to learn. A few weeks later, Marcus started asking me questions. Not questions meant to challenge me, questions because he genuinely wanted to understand. How did you know that neighborhood would respond well? Why did you choose that approach? What made you take that risk? And every time, I answered honestly. Because I wasn't interested in making Marcus feel inferior. I knew what it felt like to be looked down on. I didn't want to become the same kind of person who once hurt me. One night, Marcus sat in his office looking through our project results. He saw something he had never considered before. Success wasn't only about profit. It was about impact. The families moving into those homes. The communities improving. The people getting opportunities. And that was something money alone could not measure. One evening, Marcus asked me to meet him. Just the two of us. No business documents. No family members. No audience. When I arrived, he was already there. He looked different. Less confident. More honest. "I owe you something," he said. I looked at him. "What?" "An apology." I didn't expect that. Marcus looked down. "For years, I thought because I had more money, I had more value." He paused. "And I thought because you had less to offer." I listened quietly. But I was wrong. Those words meant something. Because I knew they weren't easy for him. "I judged your beginning and ignored your character." I nodded. "Marcus, I appreciate you saying that." He looked at me. "I don't know if I would have handled things the way you did." I smiled slightly. "Most people wouldn't." He laughed softly. And for the first time, we had a real conversation. Not as enemies. Not as competitors. As two men who had both learned something. The biggest surprise was how much the family began changing. Reginald became more open. Elaine became less focused on appearances. Even Diana, who once had the sharpest words, became quieter. Not because she suddenly became a different person overnight, but because life had humbled everyone. One evening, we all sat together at the Whitmore mansion, the same place where I once felt like an outsider, the same dining room where I wondered if I belonged. But this time, everything felt different. Reginald looked at me. "You know, Jamal, I realized something." I waited. "We spent so much time measuring people by what they had." He looked around the table. "We forgot to ask who they were." Nobody spoke, because everyone knew the truth. Walking away from that mansion that evening, I thought about everything. The pain, the rejection, the moments I questioned myself. And I realized something. The greatest victory was never making people who doubted me feel embarrassed. The greatest victory was becoming someone I was proud to be. Because when you know your worth, someone else's opinion cannot take it away. But I also knew something else. The story was not over. Because just when we thought the Whitmore family had overcome their biggest challenge, a new problem appeared. And this time, it would test whether our new relationship was real success, as a way of making people comfortable. When things are going well, everyone believes they understand the future. People smile more, meetings feel easier, problems seem smaller. But the truth about any business, any family, and any relationship is this. You don't really know what you have built until something challenges it. And that challenge came sooner than any of us expected. For months, the partnership between my company and Whitmore Enterprises had been growing. The project was moving forward. Investors were satisfied. The community response was better than expected. For the first time in a long time, the Whitmore family wasn't just surviving, they were rebuilding. But then one morning, everything changed. I walked into my office and noticed the expression on my assistant Kevin's face. I immediately knew something was wrong. "Jamal, we have a problem." I placed my briefcase down. "What happened?" He handed me a folder. Inside were reports, complaints, legal notices, and information that could damage everything we had worked for. The emergency meeting happened that afternoon. Reginald looked older than I had ever seen him. Not weak, just tired. Because when you build something for decades, the thought of losing it carries a different kind of weight. Marcus sat quietly. The confidence he once carried so easily was gone. Reginald placed the documents on the table. A group of investors is threatening to pull out. I looked through the reports. Why? Marcus answered. They believe the project has too much risk. I continued reading. But something didn't make sense. The numbers were not the real problem. The problem was perception. Someone had created doubt. Someone had convinced people that the project was failing before it had a chance to succeed. I looked up. This isn't just a financial issue. Everyone looked at me. It's a trust issue. Reginald leaned forward. What do you mean? People have stopped believing in the project. And when people stop believing, even good businesses can fall apart. Marcus stood up. So what do we do? A few months earlier, that question would have sounded impossible coming from him. Marcus Whitmore asking me for advice. But life changes people. I looked at the documents again. We don't hide. Everyone became quiet. We go back to the community. Marcus looked confused. The investors? They are important. But the people who will actually live there are more important. I explained my plan. We would hold community meetings. We would answer questions. We would listen to concerns. We would show people that this project was not just about making money. It was about creating something valuable. Marcus nodded slowly. That might work. I smiled slightly. A year ago, he would have challenged every idea I gave. Now he was considering it. That was growth. Over the next few weeks, we did something different. We stopped sitting behind desks. We stopped making decisions from expensive offices. We went directly to the people. I walked through neighborhoods. I listened to parents. I spoke with business owners. I heard concerns. And something happened. People started trusting us again. Because people can tell when someone is pretending. They can tell when someone only cares about numbers. But they can also tell when someone truly listens. Tasha came with me during some of those meetings. Watching her interact with people reminded me of the woman I fell in love with. The woman who cared about others. The woman who didn't always care about wealth and appearances. And I realized something. Maybe we weren't just rebuilding a business. Maybe we were rebuilding everything. One evening, Reginald called me. But this time, it wasn't about business. It was personal. I've been thinking, he said. I listened. When you first married Tasha, I thought I knew what kind of man you were. I remained quiet. I thought because you didn't have what we had, you weren't prepared for this family. He paused. But I was wrong. Those words meant more than he probably realized. Because Reginald was not just admitting he was wrong about business, he was admitting he was wrong about me. I spent years building a company, he continued. But I forgot something important. What was that? He sighed. Character is something money cannot buy. Months later, we stood outside the completed project. Families were moving in. Children were playing. Businesses were opening. And I looked around at everything we had created. The same man who was once judged because of what he didn't have was now standing beside the people who once doubted him. But I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to remind anyone of the past. Because I had learned something important. Sometimes life gives you the opportunity to become the person you always knew you could be. And sometimes, the people who underestimated you become the people who finally understand you. But there was still one final chapter left. Because forgiveness is powerful. But rebuilding trust takes time. And the Whitmore family still had one more lesson to learn. People often think the hardest part of success is reaching the top. They believe the difficult moments end once you finally get what you worked for. But I learned something different. The higher you climb, the more important your choices become. Because success does not only reveal what you can achieve, it reveals who you truly are. After months of rebuilding the Whitmore project, things finally started improving. The community trusted us. Investors returned. The company that was once close to collapse was becoming stronger. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But life has a way of testing people when they least expect it. And my biggest test was not about money. It was about trust. The problem came on a Thursday morning. A report arrived that changed the mood completely. There was a disagreement among investors about ownership and future decisions regarding the project. Some investors wanted more control. They believed because they provided money, they should have the final say. Reginald looked frustrated. Marcus looked nervous. But I looked at the documents carefully, because something didn't feel right. I noticed certain decisions being pushed that would hurt the very communities we promised to help. The easy choice would have been to accept. The easy choice would have been to protect the business relationship. After all, this was a major opportunity. A decision like this could affect my company for years. But I remembered why I started. I remembered the families, the neighborhoods, the reason behind everything, and I knew I couldn't abandon that. Reginald looked at me. "What are you suggesting?" I took a breath. "I'm suggesting we protect the original purpose of this project." He nodded slowly. "But that could cost us investors." I looked at him. "Maybe." The room became quiet. "But if we lose ourselves trying to protect the business, then what exactly are we saving?" That question stayed there. Because sometimes people become so afraid of losing what they built that they forget why they built it. Reginald looked down. Years earlier, he would have dismissed my opinion. But now, he listened. "I used to think business was only about winning." He paused. "Maybe I was wrong." I nodded. "Winning means different things to different people." Later that day, Marcus stopped me. "I need to ask you something." I turned. "What's that?" "Why are you willing to risk this?" I knew what he meant. Why risk money? Why risk reputation? Why risk a major opportunity? I looked at him. Because I know what it feels like when people make decisions without thinking about how it affects you. Marcus became quiet. Because he remembered. He remembered how he treated me, how he judged me, how he thought my struggles made me less important. "I used to think you were trying to prove yourself," he said. I smiled slightly. "Maybe I was." He looked surprised. "But not to your family. To myself." That evening, Tasha and I talked. She knew something was on my mind. "You always carry everything yourself." I smiled. "Someone has to." She shook her head. "No, Jamal." She reached for my hand. "You don't always have to be the strong one." Those words touched me. Because for years I believed strength meant handling everything alone. But marriage taught me something. Strength is also allowing someone to stand beside you. I was afraid, she admitted. I looked at her. Of what? That my family would always make you feel like you weren't enough. I was quiet, she continued, and I should have protected you more. I squeezed her hand. We can't change what happened. I know, but we can choose what happens next. In the end, we made the decision. We protected the original vision. Some investors walked away, but others stayed because they saw something different. They saw a company that cared about more than profit. They saw people who were willing to stand by their values. And slowly, the project became more successful than anyone expected. At the celebration event, I looked around. Reginald was there. Marcus was there. Tasha was beside me. And for the first time, we weren't standing together because circumstances forced us to. We were standing together because we chose to. Looking back, I realized something. The biggest victory was never the business. It was never the money. It was never proving anyone wrong. The biggest victory was becoming someone who could succeed without losing his character. Because people can take money, they can take titles, they can take positions, but they cannot take the person you become along the way. And as I stood there watching families enter homes we helped create, I knew one thing. The man they once underestimated had finally found his place. But the story was not finished, because part 3 would reveal the final lesson. A lesson about forgiveness, a lesson about family, and a lesson about what happens when people finally understand the value of someone they almost lost.